All right, everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. You know how sometimes you're in a new city, just exploring, having a great time, and then suddenly you realize, wait a second, I have absolutely no idea where I am.
It happens to the best of us.
Yeah, that feeling of being lost in a place you don't know can be a little unnerving, to say the least. So today we're going to treat this exact scenario kind of like we would analyze a character's challenge in a novel, right? Let's break it down and give our listeners the tools and the phrases they need to navigate this situation successfully. We'll be focusing specifically on English today, so if you're ever traveling in an English-speaking country and find yourself a bit lost, we've got you covered.
Absolutely. We'll be looking at common challenges and offering some very specific phrases and strategies like think phrasal verbs, those can be tricky, and collocations, those words that naturally go together that can really help you sound more fluent and confident.
We'll also point out some common mistakes that people make when asking for directions, because sometimes even with the best intentions, our words don't always come out quite right.
It happens. So we'll give you some alternatives that will help you communicate more clearly and effectively. And of course, a few bonus tips for staying safe. Because when you're lost, well, it's always important to be mindful of your surroundings.
So let's imagine our main character. They've found themselves a bit off the beaten path. What are some of those initial hurdles they might face when they realize they're lost?
Well, I think one of the first things that can throw people off is understanding spoken directions, particularly if you're dealing with an accent you're not used to, or if people are using local terms you haven't encountered before.
Right, like someone tells you to walk 2 blocks, and you're thinking, what in the world is a block?
Exactly. Or they say, just down the road a bit, and you're like, how far is a bit exactly? And of course, these days we're so reliant on our phones for navigation. But what happens when your GPS decides to take a break? Or your phone battery gives up the ghost?
Oh, that's the worst. The dreaded low battery symbol when you're in the middle of nowhere.
Talk about adding to the stress.
Definitely. And then there's that kind of hesitation or maybe even fear some people have about approaching strangers for help. It can feel a little intimidating, especially in a new culture where you're not sure of the social norms.
Absolutely. I think it's a natural human response to feel a little vulnerable in that situation. But the truth is, most people are happy to help if you approach them in the right way.
So before we even get into specific phrases, what's the most important thing to do when you realize you're lost?
I'd say the first thing is don't panic. Take a deep breath. Try to stay calm and collected. That'll make it much easier to think clearly and assess your situation.
Right. Freaking out never helps.
Nope, not at all. Once you've got a handle on your emotions, take a good look around. Become really observant of your surroundings. Are there any landmarks? A distinctive building? A prominent statue? Anything that stands out and could help you get your bearings?
Yeah, think of those iconic structures you see on postcards. Those can be lifesavers when you're lost.
Exactly. Those are what we call landmark buildings, and they can serve as your anchors in unfamiliar territory.
Landmarks. Got it. Now, when it comes to asking for help, there's a subtle but really important shift in phrasing that can make all the difference. Instead of just asking, "Where am I?" which can sound a little vague or even a bit demanding, try something like, "Could you help me find your destination?"
It's so much more effective. By stating your destination, you're giving the person context. They immediately understand what you're trying to accomplish, and it's easier for them to give you specific directions.
So even if you don't know exactly where you are, knowing where you're trying to go is half the battle. Makes sense. All right, now let's dive into some of those powerful English expressions that can be really handy when you're navigating a new place. And we're going to start with phrasal verbs, which we know can sometimes be a bit tricky for English learners.
Let's tackle figure out first. It's super versatile, and it basically means to understand or solve something, often by putting in a bit of mental effort. Imagine you've accidentally gotten off the bus at the wrong stop. You might think to yourself, okay, I need to figure out how to get back to my hotel from here.
So you're kind of strategizing, using your brain power to solve the problem.
Right. Or picture yourself looking at a complicated subway map. You might think, this looks confusing, but I'm going to figure out the best route to take.
So figure out is all about problem solving. I like it. What about ask around?
Ask around is a great one if you're looking for specific information, but you're not sure who to ask. Let's say you're at a local market and you're searching for that one stall selling handmade jewelry. Asking around means checking with different vendors, maybe some shoppers, to see if they can point you in the right direction.
So don't be afraid to gather information from multiple sources. It increases your chances of finding what you're looking for.
Absolutely. Persistence pays off, especially when you're lost.
Now, for a phrasal verb that gives you a clear sense of direction, let's talk about head toward.
Okay, so head toward means to move in the general direction of a particular place or landmark. Someone might tell you, just head toward the clock tower, and you'll find the museum on your right. It gives you a visual cue to follow.
It's like having a compass, but instead of north, you're aiming for that prominent landmark.
Exactly. Even if you don't have specific street names or a detailed map, knowing to head toward a recognizable landmark can help you get closer to your destination.
Awesome. All right, let's switch gears a bit and talk about those dynamic duos of the English language, collocations. These are words that just naturally go together, and using them can really boost your fluency and make you sound more like a native speaker.
First up, we have landmark building, which we already touched upon. It's essentially any well-known and easily identifiable structure that people commonly use as a point of reference.
Beat the Eiffel Tower, the Statue of Liberty, Big Ben.
Yeah.
You get the idea?
Exactly. And when you're asking for directions, incorporating landmark building into your question can be super helpful. Like you could say, "Excuse me, is the train station near any landmark building I might recognize?" This prompts the person to think of those prominent structures that are hard to miss.
Great way to ensure you get directions that are actually useful. Now, what about public transport system? That's a mouthful, but it's crucial to understand when you're navigating a new city.
Definitely. Public transport system simply refers to the entire network of buses, trams, subways, trains, ferries, basically anything that's available to the public for getting around. Before you even set foot in a new city, it's a great idea to familiarize yourself with its public transport system.
Even if you're a diehard walker, knowing how the public transport system works can be a real lifesaver if you find yourself tired, lost, or in a hurry.
Absolutely. It's all about having options.
Okay, and finally, let's talk about the good old-fashioned city map. In this age of smartphones, are paper maps still relevant?
I would say yes, absolutely. While our phones are amazing tools, there's something to be said for having a physical city map as a backup. What if your battery dies, you can't get a signal, or your phone just decides to glitch out? A map is reliable, no charging required.
Plus, unfolding a map and tracing your route with your finger, it just has a certain charm to it, don't you think?
I agree. It's a more tactile, hands-on way to engage with your surroundings, and it can actually be quite fun to explore a city with a map in hand.
So before we wrap up, let's circle back to those common mistakes people make when asking for help. Just a few quick reminders to help you avoid any awkward or confusing situations.
First up, instead of bluntly asking, "Where is your destination?" remember to soften your request with a phrase like, "Could you help me find?" It goes a long way in terms of politeness.
It's a big difference. Now, another one we hear sometimes is, "Tell me how to go metro."
Right, and while the meaning is clear, it's not very grammatically correct. Instead, try saying something like, "Could you show me the way to the metro station?" Much smoother and more natural sounding.
So focus on asking for guidance rather than just demanding information.
Got it.
And finally, what about, "I don't find my way"? It gets the point across, but it's not quite idiomatic.
Right. The more natural way to say this would be, "I can't find my way back." It just flows better and sounds more like something a native speaker would say.
Okay, some great little tweaks to keep in mind. Now, for our listeners who are serious about being prepared, what are a few bonus strategies you'd recommend?
Okay, so tip number 1, always download offline maps before you travel. I can't stress this enough. It's your safety net for when you're without internet access.
Makes sense. What else?
Have important addresses written down, and I mean physically written on paper. This includes your hotel, any attractions you want to visit, basically anything you might need to show someone if there's a language barrier.
Such a simple thing, but so helpful. And finally, what about safety, especially when you realize you're lost and maybe feeling a bit vulnerable?
Always be mindful of your surroundings. Stick to well-lit areas, stay in populated places, and if something feels off, trust your instincts. Safety first, always.
Couldn't agree more. All right, before we sign off, we have a little challenge for our listeners. Picture this. You're at a bustling foreign market. The sights, the sounds, the smells are incredible, but suddenly you realize you're completely lost and your phone is dead. Using one of the phrasal verbs and one of the collocations we discussed today, how would you ask a friendly-looking vendor For directions to the nearest bus stop, let's see those creative answers in the comments.
And we'd also love to hear any stories you have about getting lost during your travels. Did you use any of the phrases we talked about? What strategies did you use to find your way?
Getting lost can be a little scary, but it can also lead to unexpected adventures and maybe even some funny stories to tell later. The key is to stay calm, use the resources you have, and don't be afraid to ask for help.
Exactly. And remember, a little bit of preparation and some key English phrases can go a long way in making your travels smoother and more enjoyable.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Until next time.
See ya.